Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome to my channel. My name is Kylie if you're new, and today we're really playing with power. Because I'm sorry, was that too cheesy? I'm sorry. Because today I'll be telling you guys my favorite kills from all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I'll be working my way up from A Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984 and going all the way up to the remake in 2010. So not wasting any time today, in terms of the kills from A Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984, I wasn't actually crazy about any of them. Don't hate me for saying that. It's not an insult by any means. I think that Freddy alone was scary enough and carried the movie enough to the point where, you know, we didn't need any over-the-top or crazy deaths. So it's not a bad thing. I just wasn't crazy about any of the deaths in this movie. So that being said, my favorite one does go to Glenn. I like the idea of getting sucked into your bed because I feel like, especially when I was a child, my bed and being under the covers with, you know, the covers over my head and stuff, that felt like the one place that was truly safe. I felt untouchable under the covers in my bed. I think this is a pretty shared experience for a lot of children. So the fact that he is in his bed and dies by being sucked deeply into his bed, that can definitely mess with your perception of how you feel about your bed. But of course, this movie is all about sleep and nightmares and messing with that. So I think that this kill perfectly exemplified that theme. Now moving on to Nightmare 2, I do have an honorable moment. I don't have an honorable death, I have an honorable moment. It's the moment when Freddy crawls out of Matt's body. The practical effects with that, it was so gross, and honestly, that scene, it holds up decently well. Not amazingly, but it holds up pretty well considering when it came out. Over 30 years ago. It holds up for a movie that's over 30 years old. But the best death of the movie by far for me has to be Freddy's at the end. The way, you know what, I've mentioned this before on my channel, I'm not gonna really get into it, but it's just the way that he melts, the way his face, his flesh, everything just melts off of his bones. Amazing climactic moment, totally gross, totally holds up. I would say this movie, and I think part 4, The Dream Master, had my favorite practical effects out of the entire franchise. Okay, so in Dream Warriors, I have 2 favorites. I can't really say which one is my favorite because I like them for very different reasons. So the first one has to be Welcome to Primetime, bitch. This one just really gets to me. I don't think that I've ever really seen anyone die via getting their head smashed into a television before. And that's one thing I really love about this franchise is just the creativity. It's phenomenal. And Freddy also improvised that line about Welcome to Primetime. But my other favorite kill obviously has to go to the Puppet Master Freddy moment. I went in depth about that scene in my review of Dream Warriors because the way that his tendons were ripped out of his body, that, like, wow. That still holds up to this day. That scene was grotesque. That had me squirming in my skin. And then the special effects of Freddy holding him on top of that tower and ultimately making him fall, I thought that looked really good. And also just a very intense moment. So my question for you guys though is, if you had to choose between those, which one of those is your favorite? Anyways, moving on to Dream Master. My honorable mention for this one has to be the waterbed scene. I mentioned during my review of that as well that I loved that scene. I thought it was so gorgeous and I did not know how they did it. I have since watched an amazing documentary about how they did all the special effects in that movie, learned how they did it. It's incredible. The Dream Master is just one of my favorites for that very reason. But for the waterbed scene, it had one of my favorite one-liners of Freddy, "How's this for a wet dream?" I thought that was hilarious. And that scene was also very, very tasteful with the nudity. I loved how it was done. I thought that it was gorgeous. This woman was like not over-sexualized. She was just this ethereal beauty in his bed, just like floating beneath him. I thought that was so well done. Because I wonder, in a lot of my Friday reviews, I'm like, do I come off like a prude? Because I'm not one. Like, I like nudity when it's done well. So anyways, just very tasteful, just overall very well done scene. The winner, however, though, that I also brought up in my review because, of course, the girl that turned into a cockroach. Mint. The practical effects alone really just drive that scene, but also the performance of that actress. Also in the documentary that I watched, she actually said that she really enjoyed like getting dirty and getting down and like doing all that stuff. I just thought that scene was so creative, loved it. Now moving on to the Dream Child, so this is hard because again, the practical effects were amazing. I thought this movie was super cool. Did not like almost any of the deaths though, because these death scenes just trivialized really important and sensitive topics in a way that just, it did not translate. It wasn't funny. It was just, it seemed really in poor taste. One death that I didn't mind too much was the kind of comic booky death. This scene I thought was actually artistically brilliant and just really cool. And I wasn't super attached to that guy. I don't even remember what his name was, so it kind of worked out. I love how they played with the black and white and then the color and kind of how the color leaked out of his body as he was dying to symbolize symbolize his life force leaving his body. I thought that was super creative and really cool. And I almost want to give an honorable mention to Dan's death just because it was so creative and the practical effects were so cool in that scene. But Dan was my boy. I did not like that he died, so I'm not gonna say that's an honorable mention, unfortunately. So let's move on to Freddy's dead. My least favorite. Let me just say right off the bat, my least favorite death of this movie has to go to Freddy himself. I could not believe my eyes with those dumb CGI heads like coming out at us. What were what were they thinking with that? It just feels like such a slap in the face to such an iconic character, especially because that was supposed to be the last one of the entire franchise. I also just wasn't really a fan of the deaths in this movie in general either, and most of the scenes were just coded in a ridiculous amount of what was supposed to be 3D as well as computer generated graphics. It did not look good. We weren't ready for that, not in 1991. They looked bad. But if I had to choose, which I do, it would go to that super annoying guy that got his ear chopped off and then went deaf, and then Freddy attached that gross thing to his ear and you're like, what? And then Freddy was doing a bunch of really weird stuff, like he was dropping pins, and then he brought out that board and stretched it out, and then that was specifically just to scrape his knife fingers on. I guess I can sort of appreciate the theatrics of that scene and the practical effects in terms of entertainment value, but I just found Freddy to be really annoying and way too cartoonish in his mannerisms. It was very weird. I already talked about my favorite kill from Freddy vs. Jason during my Friday the 13th series and my favorite kills from Friday the 13th, so I'll link that video down below, and I am just gonna move on to New Nightmare. So in New Nightmare, unfortunately, I wasn't really a fan of the deaths in this movie either. I don't know what it was. I think, honestly, I didn't feel like there was a ton of originality when it came to the deaths in this movie. Most of them were paying homage to the prior films or to the original, so not a ton of new material to work with here. I think, again, my least favorite death would probably be Freddy's. I thought that it was just a little bit too over the top. It was pretty campy, and like the tone of the movie had felt a lot more dark up until that point, and then his death was kind of just, it was a little bit much. It was a little bit over the top. It was a little bit just too much with like the fire and him looking like a demon and his eyes popping out and all that stuff and his tongue being whatever. I think my favorite death honestly would go to Julie when she got sucked up into the ceiling, because I mentioned in my review that I actually thought that that scene was better done than it had been done in the original. Hot take, I know, because I always just kind of found it ridiculous every time one of those actresses gets sucked up to the ceiling and gets thrown around against the walls and stuff. I just found it absurd. But in New Nightmare, it was actually pretty effective and it didn't read as cheesy to me. I don't know why, but it worked better for me. So my favorite death would go to Julie. So now on to the remake, the infamous remake. The kills in this one were pretty brutal, and I do have an honorable mention. It is actually the death of Fred Krueger himself as a human. Correct me if I'm wrong, because a lot of these movies are starting to mix together for me at this point, but I don't think we'd ever actually seen his death played out in that way before, when the parents like track him down and then burn him alive. I can't remember. I don't think we've seen that before. I don't think we've seen that before, because in the original it's just like Nancy's mom is telling her what happened. I don't think there's any visualization of it. I thought that was a pretty intense moment, and I think that it did make me jump, because there is a part where he like runs right at the screen, like right to you, and I also just appreciated that we got to see that part of Freddy's life or death. But my favorite death of this movie actually has to be the very first one, the death of Kellen Lutz. I just love that opening scene so much. The movie goes downhill so much from there, and it's just such a travesty because the mood that they set, the tone, the coloring, the performances of Kellen and Katie Cassidy, the intensity of it was set so well, and then his death was wow. So I guess it's not necessarily the death itself, it's mainly because the scene prior to his death was of his dream, and the lighting was gorgeous. There were a lot of green and red tones to signal that he was dreaming and Freddy would be coming, which I thought was just a really unique touch. And I also thought it was super unique that Freddy made it look like he was slashing his own throat open. Wild. I don't think that's been done before either, and I thought that was so cool. Such a sick and twisted opening, and then that theme was not continued for the rest of the movie. I thought, wow, what an interesting new take. Freddy's gonna make it look like they're killing themselves, so who on earth is gonna believe them? But then that wasn't continued. So anyways, I've said this so many times, that first scene in the first act are the only really amazing parts of that movie, so of course my favorite kill would be contained in the first act. So yeah, that does it. Sorry about that shorter video today, but hopefully you enjoyed. Make sure you tune in next week. My wrap up of this entire series is coming next week. I can't believe it's over already. I'm gonna be done with the big 3. But a couple people have requested that I do a ranking list of all 30 of the movies from the big 3 franchises, and I was like, word, I am down. So I'm not entirely sure when that's coming. I might try to get it out on Halloween. I feel like that'll be a pretty good time. But as we know, I'm very busy. I'm not gonna promise anything. Just keep an eye out for that. If you'd like more content from me, I do have a vlog channel as well, and you can also follow me on social media. All that will be linked down below, but you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Depop, and Letterboxd at Kai Johns. Selling some movies on Depop right now, so check that out if you're interested. On Letterboxd, that's where I talk about movies that I don't intend on reviewing on this channel. Instagram is where I tell you guys what movies I'm watching so you can watch them too, just in case I do a review of them soon. Twitter is a mess. It's for whatever I want it to be for, mainly for activism, and so on that note, check out the petitions and the GoFundMe's linked down below. I update those every single week. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!